Hey everyone, and welcome to another XIM tutorial. Today I want to talk about the new official XIM firmware that came out around 2 weeks ago. Those of you who follow this channel will already know that with each new beta firmware release within the last 3 months we got closer and closer to a new official XIM firmware. And now it's finally out, the first official XIM firmware update since a little bit more than 1 year actually. And that update is pretty big, to be honest. Now in the following video I want to tell you everything you need to know about the new firmware, its features, changes and what you have to do to install that firmware on your XIM. But before I do that, I will quickly show you how you can find out if your XIM requires a new firmware or not. Even if you just bought and received your XIM, I still recommend you to do this check. So start your XIM manager now and connect it to your XIM. Click on the options in the top right and after that continue by going into the About menu. Here you can find the firmware version that your XIM and your XIM manager runs on. At the top you can find the XIM manager version and at the bottom the XIM firmware version. The numbers might look complicated, but they're actually pretty easy to read. The first number always indicates the XIM model. Since the XIM Apex is the 5th XIM product, every XIM Apex firmware will start with a 5. A XIM 4 firmware would for example have a 4 instead of a 5. After that we have the actual firmware number, which basically is just the date it has been released on. First we have the year, then the month and at last the day. As you can see, both my XIM and XIM Manager are from the 19th of July 2019. The firmware version date usually refers to the day the firmware has been forwarded to the internal testing group or the beta program. So this new official firmware is actually a little bit older than you might think. Although it has only been officially out for around 2 weeks now, it actually has been tested for more than 1 month now via the beta program. So for most of you out there, your XIM manager should now show an older firmware, probably one from 2018 or 17. In that case you should definitely upgrade, and here's how you do it. The first step is to head into the XIM forum and scroll down until you can see the Apex area. There you can click on the download section. Here you can see all the official firmware versions. At the very top you can always find the most recent one, which I will cover now in more detail. First off, this XIM firmware will also require a XIM manager update. Your manager has to be on the very same firmware version as your XIM. Of course it can also be a newer one, that's usually not a problem. To find the XIM manager download links, just scroll down all the way until you can see the manager area. For iPhone users the upgrade process is pretty easy, just download and install the XIM manager from the iOS App Store. It's the most recent one and fully compatible with this XIM firmware. Android users will have to manually download the APK from the XIM website for now, because the XIM manager in the Google Play Store hasn't been upgraded yet. It is still the old one from 2018, so please don't use it with this new XIM firmware. By the time you watch this video, the new XIM manager might also be available via the Play Store though. Until then, just use the download links from the XIM forum. As you can see, there is a 32-bit and a 64-bit version for the Android manager. If you are unsure which version your Android phone supports, then I would recommend you to try the 64-bit version first. If your phone doesn't support 64-bit, then it will give you an error message when you try to install the XIM manager. In that case, just download the other version instead. On some Android devices the download links may not work. In that case, just press and hold the link for a few seconds and your phone will ask you to download the file. The download link for the XIM firmware can be found right above. The upgrade instructions are identical for PC and Mac. The only important part you need to focus on is step 2. For that step you have to already press the button on your XIM Apex before you connect it to your PC. Once it's connected to the PC and your XIM shows a constant blue light, you can stop pressing the button. This is necessary to set your XIM Apex into the firmware mode. Now about the changes of this firmware. In total there are 6 new features. 2 of them are old XIM 4 features that have been reworked and optimized for the XIM Apex. These 2 are steady aim and boost. The other 4 are basically brand new features. Overall, most of these features will allow you to customize the aim assist of the game. Increasing, decreasing or changing the way the aim assist works with your mouse is now no longer a problem. In my opinion, those features include some of the best additions to any XIM so far, and I can only recommend you to upgrade to the new XIM firmware. But there's also a drawback. Some of the new features can have a negative impact on your mouse or keyboard movements if they are not correctly adjusted. So to prevent you from accidentally messing up your XIM configs, I will now give you a short introduction into each of the new features. You can of course also watch the dedicated tutorials that I did on these features if you want a more detailed explanation. The first addition is the steady aim feature. The idea of steady aim is to break through the aim assist to make it easier to directly aim on the enemy. In games with an extremely strong aim assist, this can actually be pretty difficult. The aim assist forms like a bubble which covers the whole enemy, and that bubble will feel like a barrier when you try to enter it to aim on the target. The stronger the aim assist, the stronger the barrier usually is. The same applies to when you want to leave the bubble to, for example, switch targets. The bubble will then act like a very strong magnet that prevents you from moving your crosshair away from the target. Steady aim is a solution to exactly those two problems, but it can also be used for a variety of different things, such as weapon recoil control, for example. Steady aim achieves this by doing the following two things. On the one hand, it will quantize the angles of your aiming vectors, and on the other hand, it will quantize your crosshair movement speed. Here you have an example picture on how the steady aim feature will quantize your aiming angles. On each of the pictures, a circular mouse movement is done on the mouse pad. Depending on what steady aim value you are using, you will then see the overlaid crosshair movements on your screen. In that regard, the steady aim feature is comparable to a customizable angle snapping algorithm. The higher the value, the more your circular mouse movements will turn into a square. If you did not fully understand this explanation, then you can watch my steady aim tutorial. There you can also find some recommendations on what steady aim values work very well for different situations. The second addition is Boost. Boost will make your mouse movements more responsive and is one of several ways with which you can reduce the aim assist. On the one hand, Boost will slightly increase your mouse sensitivity. It is only noticeable when using very high boost values though. On the other hand, Boost raises the lowest possible speed with which you can move your crosshair in the game. It's basically like an instant boost that is always added to your mouse movements. To better understand this, think about the following example. A car will always accelerate from 0 to whatever speed the driver wants to when pressing the gas pedal. The key here is that the car always starts from 0 when the driver begins to press the gas pedal. With Boost this would change though. The moment the gas pedal is touched, the car would instantly start to move at a certain speed and then continue to accelerate until the desired speed has been reached. Any speed that lies below the boost threshold can no longer be achieved by the car. This can be very useful for games that feel sluggish or slow. With Boost, your crosshair will then be much more responsive. A more detailed explanation of Boost with some recommendations on what values to go with can be found in my Boost tutorial. The third feature is the simulate analog behavior. The idea of SAB is to basically turn your keyboard movements into analog stick movements. The higher the SAB value, the closer your keyboard movements will be to those of an analog stick. Since the aim assist of games also factors in character movements, with SAB you can make sure that your keyboard inputs do not disturb or distract the aim assist algorithm. The reason for this is that keyboard movements are quite different to those of an analog stick. Especially the activation time is quite different. Here you can see two pictures that showcase this difference. On the left we have the keyboard inputs and on the right the analog stick inputs. A keyboard will always send a 100% activation signal when the key is pressed. It's either 0 or 100, but nothing in between. With an analog stick, however, you have to pack the stick to the side, and during that process the stick activation will ramp up. In the right picture it takes, for example, 100 milliseconds to pack the stick to the side, but of course that depends on how fast you can move the stick. With simulate analog behavior, your regular keyboard activation on the left will look like the analog stick activation on the right. Of course, there are also a lot of other aspects that have to be considered when turning a keyboard input into an analog stick, but the activation time is one of the biggest and easiest to understand. Once again, in my Simulate Analog Behavior tutorial you can learn more about this feature, what values to use and which situations to benefit from the SAB feature. The next feature, the deactivation delay, is not all that interesting, mainly because there's only one game so far which requires it. In Red Dead Redemption 2 there is a minor delay in the game when you switch from the ADS mode of a weapon to the regular hip mode. This feature allows the XIM to take care of that. It delays the transition on the XIM side to be in line with the game. Without that delay you would suffer from a short sensitivity jump since the XIM and the game would not be in sync. But once again, Red Dead Redemption 2 is the only game which requires this, so unless you play that game this feature is not really relevant. The fifth change is a small but important change and has been requested by the community for quite a while now. With previous firmware versions, the XIM would always switch back to the hip mode when you exit a sub-configuration. This was kind of suboptimal when you for example wanted to use a sub-configuration while aiming down the sights. When you left that sub-configuration, your XIM went back to the hip mode rather than the ADS mode. Now if you were still holding down your ADS button, you would then be stuck in the wrong aiming mode and suffer from a reduced mouse accuracy and sensitivity change. Thanks to this feature you can now create a chain of sub-configurations and arrange their order. The last addition is the walking key percentage. While the previous XIM firmware versions already had a walking key for moving slowly in the game, there was no option to adjust the speed at which you were walking. The result was that in some games the walking speed was too fast and in other games it was too slow, but with the new firmware you can now fully adjust the speed at which you want to walk in the game. Now before I end the video, please share your experience with the new official XIM firmware and the new manager either in the comments down below or in the firmware forum post. Your feedback and suggestions are critical to make your XIM better and better with each month. I have added a link to the forum post in the video description down below if you want to share your feedbacks there. Guys, if you liked this video, hit the like button or even subscribe to this channel. And for the crazy guys out there, you can even become a channel member now. I'd really appreciate that. Also, let me know if you would like me to keep you updated on future firmware releases by doing more of these videos whenever a new official firmware comes out. But that's about it for this video guys, thanks for watching and I will maybe see you in the next one.